Hi there, everyone. 4 o'clock in New York on a very busy day of news. Washington, D.C. today bracing for the return of Donald Trump to the presidency. Within the last hour, Trump making clear just what kind of presidency he had in mind all along by naming Congressman Matt Gaetz as his choice to be the country's attorney general. Trump making that news in a social media post by saying that Gaetz will, quote, end weaponized government, which is in and of itself a delusion of the far right. It is yet another sign, though, that Donald Trump is rewarding loyalty this time above everything else as he builds a new cabinet. Since Gaetz was all in on Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election. In fact, he was so concerned about his criminal exposure that he asked Donald Trump for a pardon in the last days of Trump's first presidency. Gaetz was also under investigation for sex trafficking as recently as 2023. He will now lead the department that once investigated him, should he be confirmed. That breaking news is where we start today with former top prosecutor at the Department of Justice, Andrew Weissmann, and former Democratic Senator and MSNBC political analyst, Claire McCaskill. So Andrew Weissmann, this to me, while shocking and galling, is the least surprising thing Trump has done since he won. I think since he won Tuesday night, yesterday he put Marco Rubio atop the State Department, and people at this table said, oh, this isn't going to be so bad. On Monday, he made the announcement that he would turn to recess appointments. It's obvious that this trio of Fox News anchors, Matt Gaetz, whose biggest war in Washington is with Kevin McCarthy, and Tulsi Gabbard, was what the recess appointment was all about.
Yeah, I sort of had two reactions to this announcement, and one is very similar to yours, which is we have in the president-elect somebody who is clearly not tethered to facts or law. With respect to facts, we know he has said repeatedly that there was a fraud in the election and he won it, and we know that is not true, and he lost all of the cases but one, and that one was on some technical issue. So he is adhering to a world where facts and law don't matter. And so we shouldn't be surprised that he has selected to nominate, yet to be confirmed, somebody for the Attorney General and somebody for the Department of National Intelligence that are not just unqualified, but have shown that they're untethered to the facts and maybe also the law. So that shouldn't be surprising. And the other is really this idea of that somehow Matt Gaetz is going to be the person who prevents and stops weaponization when he is the exhibit A to weaponization. I mean, we are in pure George Orwell 1984 land where, they say black is white and we're supposed to believe it.
Claire, the rub is that people like Matt Gaetz are, well, let me just show you. They're laughing stocks on the right. Let me show you what Claire's in here. Oh, we're working on this, but let me share some of the things that folks on the right have said about him with you, Claire. Eric Hirschman, who was White House counsel for Donald Trump, I think the country got to know him during the January 6th Select Committee hearings, confirmed on the record in his deposition. When asked, was Representative Gaetz requesting a pardon? Eric Hirschman, I believe so. The general tone was, we may get prosecuted because we were defensive of the president's positions on things. Question, how do you know that Congressman Gaetz asked for a pardon? John McEntee, he told me. Tell me about that. John McEntee, he told me he'd asked Meadows for a pardon. Cassidy Hutchinson, Gaetz was personally pushing for a pardon, and he was doing so since early December. Asked by Adam Kinzinger, the only reason I know to ask for a pardon is because you think you've committed a crime. Claire, this is the kind of person you also install if your plan is what you talked about on the campaign trail and what you insisted, even in friendly interviews, wasn't your plan, and that's retribution.
Yeah, there's a couple of things about this. First, I have to think that there are more than 4 votes that would not show up for Matt Gaetz in the Republican caucus. I did a quick rundown of the Republican senators, and I came up with 11 names that I think would likely oppose a Matt Gaetz. Now, half or more of those could disappoint America and vote for someone who is so wholly unqualified for this job in so many ways. But is Donald Trump nominating him so that he can get Tulsi Gabbard through, or maybe this Fox News contributor? We've gone from only hiring the best people to only hiring people that are completely unqualified for the jobs that they are being nominated for. The Fox News guy, he's never run anything. And this is a huge enterprise, the Department of Defense. Matt Gaetz has no experience that would lend itself towards running the Department of Justice and everything that's involved there. And people think the Department of Justice is just about, who's getting prosecuted, that we're talking about on national news. We're talking about a huge swath of criminals in this country and running a department with integrity, going after bad guys that are breaking the law, whether it's drugs or bank robberies or other serious crimes, criminal enterprises that are complex and difficult. I mean, Andrew can tell you all this. It is shocking. I guess I shouldn't be shocked, but it sure is nervy for somebody who has his own ethical problems to be nominated for a job that has had really some stellar men and women running that department in my lifetime and, frankly, in the history of this country.
I want to make sure that we don't sort of follow the shiny object of the Matt Gaetz of it all. And I would like to ask you, Andrew, to take the Fox Weekend host, Mr. Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and Matt Gaetz as a piece, and just articulate for me what the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Defense, and the U.S. Department of Justice do on, say, a September 11th like tragedy for the nation. What are the roles of those three agencies?
It's funny. That's exactly where I was going, because post 9/11, what you do in the intelligence community, at the Department of Defense, at the CIA, at the Department of Justice, at the FBI, is you do all of the things within the FBI and the department that Claire talked about, sort of domestic criminal law enforcement. And obviously, those can be incredibly important. They can involve murder and rape and child pornography and the kinds of crimes that everyone listening would find horrendous and have to be prevented and prosecuted. But post 9/11, this is a very dangerous and serious world. It is absolutely imperative that those agencies are operated by experienced adults, people who know what they're doing, who can make this country safe. Part of that is knowing the intelligence community, understanding triage, what are real threats, what are not so real threats, and also being able to build really important relationships with countries around the world, those who are sort of publicly friendly to us and those who are willing to be friendly and provide information, but in a quiet way. So having those diplomatic skills is incredibly important in order to make this country safe. Just to be clear, it's about safety of Americans and other people living in this country. Having people who are not qualified or not serious is something that endangers this country. I have to say, like, sort of first reaction to these nominations is that they must be sort of like test balloons, because it's so unimaginable that that is what you would do for a topic that is so serious. And I really truly hope that Claire is right, that we're going to see that sort of adult supervision come from the Senate in an area that is so important to all of our safety.
Well, and I guess, the only thing that I would say before everyone loses their collective minds here over the lack of seriousness is that Donald Trump wasn't elected to put Tulsi Gabbard in charge of national security or Matt Gaetz in charge of the Department of Justice or the Fox Weekend guy whose name what is his name? What? Pete Hegseth. Can I get a spelling? Hegseth. So Donald Trump was elected to do one thing: keep Americans safe. That's what his voters would tell you. And that means economically secure and safe from, let me quote Trump, criminal gangs. Who deals with criminal gangs, Claire? Might it be anyone at DOJ? I mean, who deals with Iran, a country that Donald Trump says is running all over the USA? Might it be DOD or the intelligence community? Donald Trump can't leave unserious people in charge of the things that are the very reason his base of supporters turned out and voted for him. So just, again, putting sort of the shocking lack of qualifications Tulsi, Matt, and Pete Hegseth have between the three of them. Talk about the political liabilities of putting such novices in charge of things that are so central to whether Donald Trump succeeds or fails.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I'm wondering what Marco Rubio is saying about this. Marco Rubio already had a very important Democrat, the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, steeped in all matters of national intelligence and international relations, come out and say that Marco Rubio was a good choice. Marco Rubio will fly through the Senate and will probably get some Democratic votes. You have to wonder what the military people who understand what DNI is think about Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, this is an unserious person. This is a person who flaunts conspiracy theories, made up something about biolabs being put by the United States in Ukraine, and who changed parties in a way that really showed that she was more interested about getting attention than she was serious policy issues. So I am, and by the way, the recess appointment thing, are we really at the point that this Supreme Court would say that the Attorney General of the United States can be put in place without advice and consent of the Senate and the United States Constitution? Have we gotten to that point? Because that's what we're talking about. And I think there will be some real head scratching going on among a whole lot of folks, both in the United States Senate and across the street in the Supreme Court, about how Donald Trump thinks he can bypass advice and consent with people who are wholly unqualified. I mean, this Pete Hegseth, I guess that's how you say his name. I mean, I saw stuff online today where he was hawking AK-47 ammunition on the 4th of July. I mean, like getting people to buy AK-47 ammunition. And this is such a big job in terms of his supervision over all matters in the Department of Defense. They may all be going, oh, great, he's going to clean out all the woke people in the military. Well, I got news for everybody. Our military is not woke. Our military is professional and trained and non-political. And I think the leadership at the Department of Defense and the leadership at the Pentagon is horrified at this moment.
It may say something about our algorithms, Claire, but I saw a picture of him in these like barely there underwear when I Googled this guy and a flag at 9/11 Memorial. Let me bring into the conversation New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt, who did a rather in-depth body of reporting on Donald Trump's efforts to weaponize the Department of Justice against his perceived enemies in the first term, and how under the radar the success of that effort really was when it came to ensnaring people like Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton, Andy McCabe, and others in tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, even if it didn't result in successful prosecutions. Mike, your first reaction to Matt Gaetz as the country's Attorney General?
I mean, I can't help but look at it through the lens of our reporting on Gaetz. In May of 2021, just a couple of months after January 6th, we reported that Gaetz was under investigation by the Justice Department for whether he had had this sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl and paid for her to travel. And this was ultimately a pretty extensive investigation that looked at whether Gaetz had violated a law that would have had a mandatory minimum of a 10-year prison sentence. And so if he had been charged with this crime of sex trafficking a minor and convicted, there would be no wiggle room on the sentence. He would have gone away for 10 years. And it was a pretty serious investigation. It focused and was the chief witness against him was a guy named Joel Greenberg, who was a former local tax collector in Florida, who said he had participated with Gaetz in these activities with this 17-year-old girl. And there was extensive evidence that Greenberg and his lawyer, Fritz Scheller, had provided to the government about Gaetz's involvement with the girl. And there was a big question out there. Was Gaetz going to get indicted? And this really hung over Gaetz. And ultimately, the Justice Department declined to charge Gaetz. And some of the department never gave a reason for that. The department usually doesn't when they decide not to charge someone, but they allowed Gaetz to put out a statement in which he said he had not been charged. And some of the question about whether he wasn't charged was it because the girl was basically 17 3/4 and close to 18? Was that the reason why they had not brought the charge, that she was so close to the age of 18? Because had he been charged with it and had he been convicted, it would have been a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence in prison, which is very obviously as serious as it comes at the federal level.
Mike, the Republican establishment seems to not even the establishment, the MAGA Republicans don't have any affection or affinity for Matt Gaetz. Trey Gowdy said this about him, quote, "I can't tell you the psychiatric diagnosis for Matt Gaetz. I can just tell you it's dangerous for the Republican Party." Another Fox News anchor said, quote, "I would compare him to that toddler that we've all seen at the family barbecue, eating toilet paper, shoving Cheerios up his..." Actually, you know what? I have it. Let me let it do its own justice.
I can't tell you the psychiatric diagnosis. I can just tell you it's dangerous for the Republican Party.
You need to put your country ahead of your own personal hatred. Man, you got to get control of it, brother. But he won't.
I would compare him to that toddler that we've all seen at the family barbecue, eating toilet paper, what? Shoving Cheerios up his nose to get attention.
So, Mike Schmidt, I guess my question, Trump, who's so informed by Fox News that he named a Secretary of Defense, a gentleman named Pete Hegseth, who is the weekend anchor of that network's morning show, has chosen someone who doesn't even have fans on Fox News. What is the tie that binds? I mean, I wonder, are you alluding at it? Is it another person who knows what it's like to be under investigation by the department itself? Is that the tie between Trump and Gaetz?
The other thing about Gaetz in this line was that there were a lot of different people at different points that picked up the baton for Trump and pushed back on the Russia investigation or anything that the department was doing related to Michael Cohen or any of the investigations that could touch Trump. And Gaetz was one of Trump's most blindly loyal defenders. He would go out at these hearings, these House hearings, and do whatever he needed to do to defend Trump in the face of this and go after the department and criticize the department and throw different things at the wall to try and undermine the Russia investigation and such. Trump even references this in his statement that announces Gaetz's nomination to be Attorney General. He said that, Gaetz was really important in unraveling the Russia hoax. And the thing about Gaetz is that there has been some turnover in the House amongst Republicans, but Gaetz is someone that's been there throughout it and has been loyal to Trump throughout it. And when it came time for stuff around January 6th and the efforts to overturn the election, Gaetz was there for Trump. And, he has been there in the months afterwards here. And, I don't, know as well as the congressional reporters all the ins and outs of it, but, Gaetz obviously playing a central role in ousting Kevin McCarthy in the House. And, something that a lot of people thought he was doing at Trump's behest. So this is someone who has been by Trump's side all the way back to the beginning of the Russia days, or the Russia investigation days, and really built his brand around that, of embracing Trump and trying to protect Trump's blind side. so much so that, he thought that he could get a pardon in the end, pushing the White House in the final weeks of the administration.
Andrew Weissman, what is your sense of what is happening with this trio of appointments, with Matt Gaetz coming to head the Department of Justice, if he's confirmed or appointed via recess appointment, Tulsi Gabbard overseeing the nation's intelligence agencies, and Pete Hegseth heading over to the Pentagon? What is your sense of the kinds of conversations and thinking, especially among national security folks who don't actually bring or charge or try cases at all?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things. One, with respect to the intelligence community, where there generally is not the kind of turnover where you're saying, oh, you're going to see people leaving, as you might see at the Department of Justice. I think there probably is a real sense of trying to work very close ties that the intelligence community agencies have with various people on the Hill, as Claire would know, and to talk about the dangers here. In many ways, when you saw Mike Johnson support the effort in Ukraine, I think that was a result of a lot of serious adult conversations. I think it's why, as Claire said, you see some support from Marco Rubio. The idea that serious people, even with policy differences that are very drastic, can talk to each other about why this is just not in America's interest. It's not in the public interest. As you note, Nicole, it may not be even in Donald Trump's own political interest to have this. So I think there probably is a lot of discussion about sort of having those conversations about why this trio is just not right. It is also very difficult when you have people like that coming in for them to be able to work in those environments where those people are steeped in what they know what they're doing. They have very set ways. But I think that's sort of one conversation. Within the department, I think there are probably two types of conversations. One is, if this really were to come to pass, that people are probably thinking about leaving, and there are probably other people who are thinking it's even more important that they stay in order to make sure that facts are facts and the law is complied with, and that these kinds of people make it even more important for people who believe in the rule of law to stay in their positions, not to fight on the policy issues. The elections have consequences, but to make sure facts and law still matter.
And again, Andrew, just talk about what kind of person. I mean, the person that runs the department actually isn't the AG. It's the principal deputy, the job that Lisa Monaco has. What kind of person would go in and be principal deputy to Matt Gaetz and make all of the sort of offices all across the country, all the U.S. attorney's offices, the places that actually prosecute the kind of criminals Donald Trump spent 4 years making his base very, very afraid of? The people who hold those people to account and send them to jail are, in many instances, if they're federal crimes, the U.S. attorneys around the country. What kind of person would go run the department for Matt Gaetz?
Well, to me, it would have to be somebody who's equally sort of, untethered to the facts and law, because that would just be an incredibly difficult position. I mean, the Deputy Attorney General is, as you note, sort of the chief operating officer and deals with a lot of the day-to-day. But I cannot stress enough, though, that even with that, the Attorney General sets policy. The way in which he or she conducts herself or himself really sets a tone for what is expected within the department. They set policies that everyone adheres to, and that the Deputy Attorney General, the number two, establishes and sort of promulgates within the department. So it is very hard to get. It would be very hard to get a serious Deputy Attorney General in there. In this situation, you would clearly need to have somebody who was a former prosecutor, and ideally with intelligence community expertise. That's why Lisa Monaco was so extraordinary, because she has such a breadth of knowledge on the criminal and national security side. But it's hard to see how this administration is going to attract somebody like that if you're going to nominate somebody like Matt Gaetz, and what that signals in terms of, I would say, the way in which the White House is going to view the department, which is just a political tool of the White House.
Which is a nod again to Mike's reporting exactly what Donald Trump said he wanted. Andrew Weissman and Mike Schmidt, thank you for starting us off. Claire sticks around for the hour. Still ahead for us. More on this breaking news, the fire hose of appointments coming from President-elect Donald Trump. We'll talk with a member of the House who has seen Matt Gaetz up close and personal. Plus, more on Pete Hegseth, the weekend Fox News host selected for a supremely important position for our country and our allies. We'll bring you all those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
And was Representative Gaetz requesting a pardon?
I believe so. The general tone was, we may get prosecuted because we were defensive of, the president's positions on these things.
How do you know that Congressman Gaetz asked for a pardon?
He told me.
Tell us about that.
He told me to ask Meadows for a pardon.
Mr. Gaetz was personally pushing for a pardon, and he was doing so since early December.
Turning our coverage, MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller's here, former RNC spokesman, now host of the Bulwark podcast, and state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida. Dave Ehrenberg is here. Dave, we've been talking to New York Times reporter Mike Schmidt about the investigation that went on for a few years into sex trafficking allegations and the decision by DOJ not to ultimately charge Matt Gaetz, but that his former acquaintance, Mr. Greenberg, is currently in prison and had offered some pretty, I guess in another time, would be disqualifying testimony or associations about the man who, if confirmed, will be America's next Attorney General. Your thoughts?
It is a sign of the times that we're actually talking about Matt Gaetz being confirmed for Attorney General. It's shocking because is very close to being indicted by the Department of Justice. And I think the reason why he wasn't was that the two key witnesses against him, Joel Greenberg and the then underage girl, both had credibility problems. Joel Greenberg is a walking criminal enterprise. He had lied about his previous political opponent being a pedophile. So the government was not going to rely on him. And as far as the alleged victim, she lied about her age and went on this sugar daddy type of website and now does adult films. And I'm not castigating someone for their choice of employment, but it doesn't have jury appeal. So the DOJ looked at both of them and said, we need more. And so they subpoenaed Matt Gaetz's former girlfriend, who actually is legit, who worked for the federal government, the state government, and she was given immunity to testify before the grand jury. And apparently she only gave him up on the witness tampering issue. And unless you have an underlying crime against a sitting congressman, the DOJ was not going to prosecute Matt Gaetz for tampering with a witness. And so they let it go. Now, the House Ethics Committee is continuing to subpoena documents and even was going to subpoena Matt Gaetz himself in an attempt to possibly throw him out of Congress like George Santos. Kevin McCarthy was behind this. But now, who knows what's going to happen? The only thing I can say is because Gaetz has so many enemies, including Kevin McCarthy, powerful enemies, there is a chance that enough Republicans in the Senate could block the nomination.
Tim Miller, I actually exhaled when I saw this news for the first time in 7 days because I felt like I was smoking crack when people were like, it's not going to be that bad. Marco Rubio is totally normal. And I was like, you think? Now we're back to Donald Trump with a 43 to 46% approval rating, a ceiling that wasn't visible last Tuesday. And the reason he was as unpopular as he was for his entire presidency is because he surrounded himself with people that didn't inspire confidence that the central missions of a promised Trump presidency, fighting crime, some sort of coherent and tough policy on immigration, and keeping America safe from whomever he describes as our enemies. I know it doesn't include Russia, but his own list includes Iran, as he himself is a target for their malevolent actions. These are not the people to do anything competent. The Fox and Friends anchor, Tulsi Gabbard, or Matt Gaetz. Your reaction?
Yeah, Nicole, well, our reactions are aligned as usual. Last night, I felt that way with the Hegseth nomination. So I was like, okay, we don't have to live in this stupid world where people are going to pretend like Donald Trump is going to be nominating serious people or whatever.
Yeah.
And we can just see the truth.
I should have called you. I should have called you because Jeremy Basher's on my show. He's like, the Senate's going to hold the line and he's going to do, and Donnie Deutsch sat here. He's like, looks good, looks good. I'm like, what? We're in year 9. Like, you could say those things in year 1, but year 9, he always caves to his weakest, most insecure instincts.
Indeed. And the party, Republican Party does, right? And so, I don't have a crystal ball for, which rare moments we'll like see the tiny spine of a handful of 4 Republican senators over the next 4 years. But you're not going to go bankrupt betting against them to show any spine against Donald Trump in the coming years. I certainly don't think they're going to stand up to his cabinet appointments. Who knows? Maybe one of them. It's hard to what exactly would be their rationalization for not appointing somebody like Matt Gaetz or Pete Hegseth after they supported a felon for president? It's like, well, Matt Gaetz had some allegations against him. Well, you supported a felon for president who is indicted in 4 different jurisdictions. Well, Pete Hegseth is unserious. Well, you supported a reality TV host who was a scam artist who had a failed university and failed water company for president. So, there's no rationale for being for Donald Trump for commander in chief and not whatever, ridiculous alignment of characters he chooses to be around him and his cabinet. So I find the whole thing, to your point about people's reaction yesterday, I was just, looking online and listening to your previous guests, and it's like the reporters on the Hill saying that John Cornyn is snorting and people at the Pentagon are aghast. And it's like, where were all these people? Obviously, Donald Trump was going to pick his cronies and TV show hosts to run the government. That's what he told us he was going to do. And so, I think that there are some people, the former establishment, the establishment of the GOP now is MAGA, but the former establishment of the GOP, the ones who remain, John Thune, they're in for a rude awakening as these hits are going to keep on coming. And I expect that most of these people, if not all of them, will be confirmed and possibly confirmed by a recess appointment, which would be an unprecedented destruction of norms. But that would just be the latest in a long line of unprecedented norm destructions.
Yeah, and not for Donald Trump, who had I think by the end of his first term, almost more than half of his cabinet was in an acting position. And he said in interviews, friendly interviews, that he liked it that way. Let me show you what one Republican Senator, Markwayne Mullin, said about Matt Gaetz last year.
There's a reason why no one in the conference came and defended him, because we had all seen the videos he was showing on the House floor that all of us had walked away of the girls that he had slept with. He'd brag about how he would crush ED medicine and chase it with an energy drink so he could go all night.
ED medicine? Is that erectile dysfunction medicine? Wow. We are not covering America's best. Joining our coverage, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent who works in the building where that gentleman, that senator, Republican senator, just told this extraordinary story about America's incoming attorney general. He was, quote, crushing ED medicine, chasing it with energy drinks so he could, quote, go all night. America's next AG, Allie?
Not quite the introduction I ever thought I would